In Valley, Pennsylvania, a miracle happened that folks still talk about years later. This is the story of Molly Pearson, a mechanic's daughter who shocked an entire community with nothing but determination, a wrench, and a pile of junkyard metal everyone else called trash. Mocked by the wealthy Peton family and their racing cronies, nobody believed her rebuilt junker would make it past the first turn of the Valley Grand Prix. What they didn't know was that Molly had spent 6 months working until her fingers did using engineering techniques her late mother had taught her, creating innovations the racing world had never seen. On race day, when her car's engine roared to life with a sound no one recognized, a few eyebrows raised. And when she crossed in that finish line first, despite sabotage and a mechanical failure that should have ended her race, she didn't just win a trophy. She saved her family's business and showed an entire town that sometimes extraordinary things come from the people we least expect. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The final notice sign glared back at George Pearson as he taped it to the inside of his office window, facing it outward for the world to see. 60 days. That's all they had left before the bank took Pearson's auto repair, the business his father had started, the one he'd hoped to pass down to his daughter someday. Outside the office window, Molly Pearson worked beneath the hood of Mrs. Peterson's ancient station wagon, her hands moving with a mechanic's precision that even her father envied. At 25, Molly possessed a natural understanding of engines that couldn't be taught. It was a gift from her mother, Elizabeth, who'd been an engineer before cancer took her 5 years earlier. "Fuel pumps shot and your timing belt's about to go," Molly said as the elderly woman approached. "I can fix both, but parts aren't cheap, Mrs. Peterson." "How much we talking, dear?" The old woman's hands nervously clutched her purse. Molly wiped her hands on a rag and gave the old woman a sympathetic smile. "For you. I'll do what it cost. $300 for parts plus labor." "Oh, I don't know if I can swing that this month." George stepped out of the office, forcing a smile. "Tell you what, Irene, pay for the parts now, and we'll work out a payment plan for the labor." After Mrs. Peterson left with a grateful handshake, Molly turned to her father. "Dad, we can't keep doing this. Charity won't keep the lights on. Neither will turning away the only customers we have left." George gestured toward the bank notice. "Besides, what's one more debt at this point?" Molly looked around the garage that had been her playground as a child. 3 empty bays where there used to be cars lined up waiting, the tools her grandfather had collected over a lifetime. The photos on the wall, including one of her mother in overalls, laughing as she held up a carburetor. "I'll figure something out," she promised. "Unless you can pull a winning lottery ticket out of that toolbox, I think we need to start facing reality, kiddo." The bell at the front of the shop jingled, and Howard Peton strolled in, his Italian leather shoes looking out of place on the oil-stained concrete. Behind him trailed his son Tyler, wearing his racing jacket emblazed with sponsor logos. George, Molly. Howard nodded with exaggerated politeness. "Just thought I'd stop by to see if you'd reconsidered my offer." George's jaw tightened. "Still not selling to you, Howard." "Shame." Howard made a show of examining the near-empty garage. "I'm being generous offering market value. Considering the state of things, my developers think this location would be perfect for the new Peton Performance Center." "Is there something wrong with your car, Mr. Peton?" Molly asked pointedly. Tyler laughed as if we'd bring our vehicles here. He looked around with disdain. Dad only trusts Jenkins over. At the foreign imports garage for our everyday cars and for my racer, we've got a specialist from Pittsburgh. Howard pulled out a business card, setting it on the counter. My offer expires at the end of the month, George. For old times' sake, I hope you'll be reasonable. After they left, Molly crumpled the card and threw it in the trash. I hate that man acting like he's doing us a favor by trying to steal Grandpa's shop. Howard wasn't always like this, George said quietly. Back in high school, we were friends, if you can believe it. Used to work on cars together. What happened? Life choices. He married into money, started cutting corners. I called him out on selling rebuilt transmissions as new. Haven't been on speaking terms since. Molly checked the clock. I've got to run into town for Mrs. Peterson's parts. Need anything while I'm out? A miracle. George weakly as Molly drove her beat-up pickup toward town. She passed Peton Motors with its gleaming new vehicles and flashy race day countdown banner. In just 6 weeks, the annual Valley Grand Prix would bring racers and spectators from 3 counties. First prize was $10,000, plus a sponsorship deal with Peton Motors, not that a Pearson would ever see that money. At the parts store, Eddie Brooks was arguing with a customer when Molly entered. Look, I don't care what the computer says. That carburetor won't fit your model. The old man spotted Molly and waved her over, grateful for the distraction. The Pearson girl, just who I needed. Tell this fellow he's trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Molly examined the part in question. Eddie's right. You'd need to modify your intake manifold for this to work. The man left, grumbling, and Eddie grinned. Your mother would have said the same thing. God rest her soul. What can I get you today? Fuel pump and timing belt for an '89 Grand Mars. As Eddie disappeared into the back, Laura Fisher from the Valley Herald newspaper entered, her press badge hanging around her neck. Molly Pearson, I thought that was your truck outside. Laura had been 2 grades behind Molly in school. Any comment on the rumor that Pearsons might be closing? I'm doing a piece on changing businesses in Valley. No comment, Laura. We're not closing. That's not what I heard at the bank. Kevin Wallace was telling, look, we're fine. Okay, Dad and I are just restructuring some things. Eddie returned with the parts, sensing the tension. Anything else, Molly? Just these today. She handed over her credit card, praying it wouldn't be declined. After an awkward moment, the card went through. Eddie leaned over the counter. Your daddy still got that '67 Mustang engine block in the back of your shop? The one with the cracked cylinder, probably. He never throws anything away. Why? Just curious. Say, you planning to watch the Grand Prix this year? Tyler Peton's the favorite again. But there's a fellow from Butler County who might give him a run. Molly shrugged. Haven't given it much thought. As she left the store, she nearly collided with Steve Mitchell, the Junkyard owner. Whoa, there! Lead foot. Steve steadied her. Just the person I was hoping to run into. Sorry, Steve. What's up? Got a car hauled in yesterday you might want to look at? Guy was moving cross-country, blew the engine outside of town, and took the insurance payout instead of fixing it. It's an older model, but the frame's solid. Thought your dad might be interested for parts. We're not really buying inventory right now. Who said anything about buying? Consider it payment for fixing my tow truck last winter. Just come take a look before I crush it. At Mitchell's salvage yard, Molly followed Steve through rows of wrecked vehicles until they reached a tarp-covered shape. Here she is. Steve pulled back the tarp to reveal a 1990s sports coupe with a sleek body despite the dented rear quarter panel. Engine shot, but everything else might be salvageable. Molly walked around the car, her expert eye noticing the roll cage inside the reinforced frame. This wasn't just a regular car, this was a racer. Previous owner mentioned something about amateur circuit racing before he blew the engine. Registration's clean, though. Molly opened the hood and peered inside. The engine was indeed destroyed, but something about the car called to her. She looked at the VIN plate, then checked her phone. This model was limited production, high-performance variant. She ran her hand along the door panel. What were you planning to do with it? Crush it next week unless you want it. Like I said, it's yours if you'll haul it away. A crazy idea began forming in Molly's mind. Can I think about it? Sure. But don't think too long. That evening, Molly returned to find her father sitting at the kitchen table of their small house behind the garage, bills spread out before him. That bad? She asked, setting down a pizza box. Made enough to cover electricity this month, still short on the mortgage. He pushed the papers aside. How was town? Ran into Laura Fisher. She's writing an article about us closing. George sighed. Vultures circling already. Molly hesitated. Dad, what if there was a way to get a lot of money, past enough to catch up on everything? I'm not taking Howard's offer if that's what you're suggesting. No, I was thinking about the Grand Prix. The prize is $10,000. George laughed, then realized she was serious. Molly, you need a race car to enter the Grand Prix, plus the entry fee is $500. Steve Mitchell has a car, a real racer with a blown engine. He's giving it to me. Giving you a car with no engine. George shook his head. Even if you had an engine that would fit, which we don't, you'd need months to prepare a competitive racer. We have that Chevy 350 in the back that we rebuilt for Mr. Wilson before he decided to sell his Camaro. And there's the old Mustang block that Eddie was asking about. We could modify it. Honey, I know you're trying to help, but this is fantasy. We're mechanics, not race car builders, and neither of us is a driver. Molly sat down across from her father. Mom used to race, Dad, in college. You told me stories. Your mother drove quarter-mile sprints on weekends for fun. The Grand Prix is 25 laps on a professional track against drivers like Tyler Peton, who's been racing since he was 16. I can do it, Molly said with quiet determination. I know engines better than anyone in this town, except you and I've been driving since I was 12. It's too dangerous, and we can't afford it. We can't afford not to try, Molly counted. What's the alternative? Sell to Howard Peton? Watch him tear down everything Grandpa built. Everything you built. George looked at his daughter, seeing the same stubborn determination that Elizabeth had always shown. Let me see this car first. The next morning, they drove to the junkyard. Steve showed them the car, and George examined it with a critical eye. Frame's good. Suspension seems intact. You're right about it being a racer. Someone put good money into this before the engine went. He looked at Molly. But a new racing engine would cost more than we'd win at the Grand Prix. We don't need new, Molly argued. We need innovative. Mom always said the best solutions come from working with what you have. On the drive back, George was quiet. Finally, he said, even if, and it's a big if, we could get this car running, there's still the entry fee, safety equipment, tires. I have some savings, Molly said, and maybe Mrs. Peterson isn't the only one who'd be open to a payment plan. At the garage, George pulled out an old photo album. Your mother would probably tell me I'm crazy for even considering this. He showed Molly a photo of a young Elizabeth in a racing helmet, beaming beside a modified Honda. But then again, she'd be the first one under the hood if she were here. Molly studied her mother's face, seeing her own determination reflected back. Is that a yes? It's a, we'll see what we're working with. First, we need to get that car here and tear it down properly. The following day, Steve helped them tow the car to Pearson's auto repair. As they were unloading it, Tyler Peton drove by in his luxury sports car, slowing down to watch. He rolled down his window. What's that supposed to be? Your new tow truck? He laughed. You Pearsons finally admitting defeat. Molly ignored him, but George called back. Just expanding our services, Tyler. Have a nice day. As Tyler drove off, Molly asked, Why are you polite to them? They don't deserve it. Because it drives them crazier than if I fought back. George winked. Now, let's see what we're working with before we make any decisions about racing. By afternoon, they had the car in the middle bay, and Molly was cataloging everything they'd need to fix or replace. The list was growing long, but her excitement only built with each item. The suspension is actually better than I thought, she said, sliding out from underneath. And the frame is regulation racing spec? George was examining the transmission. This might be the one piece of good news, it's intact. The shop door opened, and Dorothy Clark, their elderly neighbor, peered in. I brought you to some lemonade. Looked like you could use it. She spotted the car. My word, what's this contraption? Just a project we're working on, Mrs. Clark, George said, accepting the drink gratefully. The old woman adjusted. Her glasses looks like a race car to me. My Harold used to race at the dirt track back in the 60s. Molly smiled. It might be. We're still deciding. Dorothy studied the car, then nodded with approval. About time someone gave those Peton boys a run for their money. Their father thinks he owns this town. After she left, George laughed. Well, I guess the secret's out now. Once Dorothy knows something, the whole town will know by dinner. So, we're really doing this? Molly asked, hope rising in her voice. George looked at his daughter, then at the final notice sign visible through the office window. I must be out of my mind. But yes, let's see if we can make this heap run. Molly's face broke into a wide grin as she threw her arms around her father's neck. For the first time in months, there was a spark of hope at Pearson's Auto Repair. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The news spread through Valley like wildfire. By the time Molly arrived at the garage the next morning, 3 customers were already waiting, more than they'd seen in a week. Heard you're taking on the Petons at the Grand Prix, said Walter Brown, a retired factory worker who'd been bringing his truck to Pearsons for decades. About time somebody stood up to those boys. Molly exchanged a look with her father, who shrugged. Word travels fast. Dorothy Clark called her Bridge Club. And well, Walter grinned. Anyway, my timing belt's been squealing. Figured I'd rather give my business to future racing champions than that overpriced dealership. Throughout the day, more curious townsfolk found reasons to stop by. Some brought vehicles needing repair, others just wanted to peek at the race, car covered by a tarp in the back bay. Business hadn't been this good in months. After closing, Molly and George finally had time to focus on the racer. George pulled out a notepad. Let's be methodical. engine, transmission, suspension, brakes, electrical, bodywork. He looked at the extensive list. We've got our work cut out for us. We should start with the engine. That's the biggest challenge. Molly wheeled over the rebuilt Chevy 350 they had in storage. This isn't a traditional racing block, but it's powerful and reliable. It'll need significant modifications to fit this chassis, and it's heavier than what these cars typically run. That could be an advantage on the straightaways. Molly traced her finger along the engine's contours. More weight means more momentum and less maneuverability in the corners, George countered. Plus, we'd need to reinforce the mounts. For hours, they debated approaches, sketching modifications on the garage's worn whiteboard. As midnight approached, George stretched his aching back. We need help, he admitted. Someone with racing experience. Tyler's been winning with Jenkins' help on his pit crew, Molly said, frustration evident. Everyone in town with racing knowledge is tied to the Petons somehow. Not everyone. George looked thoughtful. There's a man who moved here about 5 years ago. Frank Williams lives in that cabin by Copper Creek, the hermit. People say he's weird. People say a lot of things. George wiped his hands. Before he became a hermit, he was a circuit racer. Quite good from what I heard until an accident ended his career. The next morning, they drove to the outskirts of town, where a small cabin sat nestled among pine trees. A weathered no trespassing sign hung crookedly on the gate. Maybe this isn't such a good idea, Molly said as they approached the door. Before they could knock, a gruff voice called from around back. Whatever you're selling, I'm not interested. They followed the voice to find a man in his 60s working on a vintage motorcycle. His left leg had a noticeable limp as he moved around. The bike. We're not selling anything, Mr. Williams, George said. I'm George Pearson from the auto shop in town, and this is my daughter, Molly. Frank barely looked up. I know who you are. Still not interested. We're building a car for the Grand Prix, Molly blurted out. We could use some expertise. That got his attention. Frank straightened up, studying them with sharp eyes. The Grand Prix against the Peton kid. He laughed humorously. You're either brave or crazy. Maybe a little of both, George admitted. Frank's expression darkened. Racing's a rich man's game around here. Howard Peton makes sure of that. We're not rich, Molly said, but we're good with engines, the best. Being good isn't enough. You need experience, strategy, specialized equipment, which is why we came to you, George interjected. I remember watching you race years ago before you moved here. A shadow passed over Frank's face. That was another lifetime. Please. Molly stepped forward. Just look at what we're working with. Tell us if we even have a chance. Frank was silent for so long they thought he'd refuse. Finally, he sighed. I'll look. That's all I'm promising. Back at the garage, Frank circled the partially disassembled race car with a critical eye. He checked the frame, suspension, and brakes, occasionally grunting in approval or shaking his head. Chassis is decent. Previous owner knew what they were doing. He examined their proposed engine. This block, though, it's not ideal. It's what we have, Molly said defensively. Didn't say it wouldn't work, just needs rethinking. Frank ran his hand along the cylinder head. You'd need to modify the intake, redesign the exhaust manifold completely. We can do that, George said. Frank looked skeptical. And you've got what? 5 weeks until the race, plus you'll need to register soon. Get Molly licensed as a driver. You know my name, Molly realized. Small town, Frank shrugged, And Dorothy Clark talks to everyone. He continued his inspection. Your biggest problem isn't mechanical, it's Tyler Peton. He's not just rich, he's good. Been racing since he was a kid. I've been working on engines just as long. Molly, he counted. Working on engines isn't driving. The track at Valley has that tricky scurve before the final stretch. It takes experience to navigate at speed. George looked at Frank hopefully. Could you help with that? The driving part? I don't do this anymore. Frank's voice had an edge of finality. Why not? Molly challenged. What happened that was so bad you gave up something you loved? Frank's eyes flashed. You don't know what you're asking. I know the Petons will take my family's shop if we don't try something drastic. I know you have knowledge that could help us. Molly stood her ground. And I think you have your own reasons to want to see Howard Peton taken down a peg. Frank and Molly locked eyes in a silent standoff. Finally, Frank looked away. If, and that's a big if, I were to help, we'd do things my way. No shortcuts, no arguments. Agreed, George said quickly before Molly could respond. Frank pointed to the engine. First, forget this approach. It's too conventional. Tyler will have the latest factory racing engine. So, we can't win. Molly's shoulders slumped. I didn't say that. We can't beat him with the same strategy. Frank picked up a piece of chalk and approached their whiteboard. You know what wins races? Not just raw power. It's power-to-weight ratio, torque management, and driver skill. He began sketching a modified engine design. We create a hybrid approach. Take your block, but completely reconfigure the intake and exhaust. Custom headers, dual throttle bodies. George studied the design. That would increase low-end torque substantially. Exactly. While they're spooling up on the corners, you're already accelerating. Frank's eyes had a spark that hadn't been there before. But it'll take precision machining. One mistake, and the whole engine could fail. I can do precision, Molly said confidently. Frank nodded slowly. I believe you can, he continued, sketching. We'll also need to completely redesign the fuel delivery system. Develop a custom electronics package for timing, George whistled. That's beyond what I expected. Racing isn't about meeting expectations, it's about exceeding them. Frank set down the chalk. Anyway, this is all theoretical. You still need to come up with the entry fee. Parts, safety, equipment. I've got 300 saved up, Molly offered. I might be able to pull together another 100, George added. Frank shook his head. Not nearly enough. The bell at the front of the shop jingled. Maria Rodriguez from the diner walked in, followed by her husband, Tony. Sorry to interrupt, Maria said. We heard you're entering the Grand Prix and, well, she handed George an envelope. The diner staff took up a collection. It's only $200, but we wanted to help. George was speechless. Maria, I don't know what to say. Say you'll beat those Petons, Tony grinned. They've been charging us double for servicing our delivery van since you folks got into trouble. After they left, Frank raised an eyebrow. Seems you've got more supporters than I thought. Still not enough, George said, counting the money. Maybe, maybe not. Frank looked thoughtful. Tell you what, I got some old racing parts gathering dust. Probably worth a few hundred. Consider it my contribution. Molly looked surprised. Why would you do that? Frank didn't answer directly. Be at my place tomorrow at dawn. If you're serious about driving, training starts immediately. He headed for the door, then turned back. And bring work gloves. Your hands are too soft for racing. After he left, George looked at Molly. What just happened? I think we got ourselves a racing coach, Molly said, still stunned. But he's right about the money. We're still short. We'll figure it out, George promised, though uncertainty clouded his features. The next morning, Molly arrived at Frank's cabin at sunrise. To her surprise, there was no car in sight, just Frank standing in a cleared area with 2 5-gallon buckets. Where's the car?" she asked. "You don't get a car yet?" Frank handed her the buckets. "Fill these with water from the creek, then carry them along that path without spilling." What does this have to do with racing? Racing is about balance, control, and endurance. Start walking. For hours, Frank put Molly through unconventional training exercises, walking beams to improve balance, reaction tests with tennis balls. He'd suddenly throw at her push-ups and core exercises until her muscles screamed. "This is crazy," she gasped after a particularly grueling session. "Nobody trains for racing like this." "I do." Frank's expression softened slightly. "Look, Molly, driving at those speeds, your body experiences forces it's not used to. Your mind needs to stay sharp when every instinct is screaming danger. This preparation isn't optional. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Mornings with Frank for physical training, afternoons at the garage working on the car. Word continued to spread, and more townspeople found ways to contribute. Walter Brown brought over racing seats from his son's old hobby car. Eddie from the parts store found some performance spark plugs in his inventory that he could spare. By the end of the week, they had almost enough for the entry fee, but the deadline was approaching. As they worked late into the night on the engine modifications, George received a call. "Hello." "Yes. This is George Pearson." His expression grew increasingly concerned. "I see. Yes, I understand. Thank you for letting me know." Hanging up, he turned to Molly. "That was Harold Newman from the racing committee. Howard Peton has filed a protest against our entry. Claims we don't meet the technical qualifications for the race." "He can't do that," Molly protested. "Apparently he can. Harold says the committee will meet tomorrow to decide whether to accept our application." George ran a hand through his hair. "Howard's donated a lot of money to the Speedway over the years. He has influence. So that's it. He just keeps us out and wins by default." "Not if I can help it," Frank said, surprising them both. They hadn't noticed him enter. "The committee meeting. Is it public?" "Yes, at the community center at noon." "Then we'll be there." Frank's expression was determined. "And we're bringing the car." The next day, a small crowd had gathered outside the Valley Community Center as George, Molly, and Frank arrived with the partially completed race car on a trailer. Though still missing body panels and a paint job, the mechanical work was taking shape. Inside the racing committee sat at a long table Howard Peton beside them, looking smug. His expression faltered when he saw Frank Williams enter. Harold Newman called the meeting to order. "We're here to consider a protest against the entry of he consulted his papers. Pearson, racing to the Valley Grand Prix. Mr. Peton has raised concerns about technical qualifications." Howard stood. "The rules clearly state that all entries must meet safety specifications and technical standards. The Pearsons are proposing to enter what amounts to a junkyard car with inadequate modifications. It's a safety hazard to themselves and other drivers," murmurs spread through the room. Howard continued. "Furthermore, Ms. Pearson has no racing license or documented experience. The integrity of the Grand Prix would be compromised." "That's not true," Molly interjected. "Our car." Harold held up his hand. Ms. Pearson, you'll have your chance to respond. He turned to Howard. Mr. Peton, is there anything else? Only that as the primary sponsor of the Grand Prix for the past 5 years, I have a responsibility to ensure the event maintains certain standards. Howard's implication was clear. His financial support hinged on getting his way. Harold looked uncomfortable. Thank you, Mr. Peton. Now, Miss Pearson, your response. Molly started to speak, but Frank stepped forward. If I may, I'd like to address the committee first. A hush fell over the room. Even Howard looked interested. My name is Frank Williams. Some of you may remember me from the national circuit. Frank surveyed the room. I've inspected the Pearsons' vehicle personally. Modifications follow regulation standards, and once completed, it will meet all safety requirements, Howard scoffed. With all due respect, Mr. Williams, your racing days are long behind you. Perhaps. Frank's voice remained steady. But my knowledge isn't. As for Miss Pearson's qualifications, I'm officially sponsoring her as a professional driver under Rule 15B of your own bylaws, which allows for entry of new drivers under the guidance of a licensed professional. Harold shuffled through his papers, clearly surprised. Rule 15B does exist, and I still hold a Class A competition license, Frank continued, pulling a worn card from his wallet. It never expired. Check your records. The committee members conferred in whispers. Howard leaned over to say something to Harold, his face tightening with anger. Finally, Harold addressed the room. The committee needs to verify Mr. Williams' credentials and inspect the vehicle. We'll take a 30-minute recess outside. George pulled Frank aside. You still have a valid racing license after all these years? Never saw a reason to let it lapse. Frank watched as committee members examined the car. One thing Howard doesn't know. Harold Newman was my pitchie for 2 seasons back in the day. He knows I wouldn't put my name behind something unsafe. Molly joined them. Even if they approve us, we're still short on the entry fee. About that, Frank pulled an envelope from his pocket. I made some calls to old racing buddies. They were happy to contribute to the cause, especially when I mentioned it was against Howard Peton. Molly opened the envelope to find several hundred. This covers the entry fee, with some left over for parts. But I don't understand. Why do your friends have an issue with Howard? Frank's expression darkened. Let's just say Howard's reputation in racing circles isn't stellar. He stepped on a lot of people to get where he is. The committee members returned, and Harold called the meeting back to order. After reviewing the vehicle and Mr. Williams's credentials, the committee has reached a decision. While we have concerns about the time frame for completion, we find no direct violation of regulations that would disqualify the entry. Harold looked at Howard apologetically. The protest is denied, and Pearson Racing is granted provisional acceptance pending final safety inspection 1 week before the race. The small crowd of supporters erupted in cheers. Howard stormed out, Tyler following in his wake. This isn't over, Tyler hissed as he passed Molly. Nobody makes a fool of the Petons. As the crowd dispersed, Sheriff Joe Anderson approached them. Quite a show you folks put on. Just be careful. Howard doesn't take defeat gracefully. We can handle Howard, George said confidently. The sheriff didn't look convinced. Maybe so, but keep an eye on your garage. Accidents have a way of happening when the Petons feel crossed. That night, as they celebrated their small victory at the garage, Molly couldn't shake the sheriff's warning. Dad, maybe we should take turns staying here overnight just to be safe. George started to dismiss her concern, then reconsidered. Probably smart. I'll take first watch. No. I will. Frank surprised them by saying, "You two need rest. You've got an engine to finish tomorrow." Later, as Molly drove home to get some sleep, she spotted Tyler's sports car parked outside Jenkins' garage. Through the windows, she could see him talking animatedly with Carl Jenkins and several other men. Whatever the Petons were planning, they were moving quickly. The real race, Molly realized, had already begun. Dawn broke over Pearson's auto repair as Molly arrived carrying a tray of coffee cups. The past week had established a new rhythm. Frank keeping watch overnight, Molly arriving at first light, George coming in after handling their regular customer work. To her surprise, she found Frank not alone, but deep in conversation with Eddie Brooks from the parts store. "Morning," Eddie called, looking more animated than Molly had seen him in years. "Been showing Frank my collection." He gestured to a box of old racing magazines spread across the workbench. "Eddie was just telling me about your mother," Frank explained. "I hadn't made the connection until now." "You knew my mom?" Molly said down the coffee. Eddie picked up a magazine and flipped to a dog-eared page. Elizabeth Watson, before she was Elizabeth Pearson, was something of a legend in college engineering circles. He handed Molly the magazine showing a young woman standing proudly beside a modified engine. She pioneered some fuel injection techniques that the big boys are still using. Molly touched the photo reverently. "Dad told me she raced, but I didn't know about this. Your father was her mechanic before he was her husband." Eddie chuckled. They were quite the team. She had these notebooks full of ideas. The notebooks. Molly's eyes widened. Dad kept them in a box in the attic. "I used to look at the drawings as a kid, but I couldn't understand the math back then." Within the hour, George arrived to find Molly surrounded by dusty notebooks filled with Elizabeth's precise handwriting and technical drawings. "I haven't seen these in years," he said softly, picking one up. "Some of her ideas were way ahead of their time." Molly pointed to a detailed sketch of a modified intake system. "This could work with our engine block. The calculations show a 15% efficiency improvement over standard designs." Frank studied the diagram. "Your mother understood something fundamental that most engineers miss. Racing isn't just about raw power. It's about how that power is delivered." For the next several days, Elizabeth's notebooks became their blueprint. The garage transformed into a proper race shop with borrowed tools and donated equipment filling the space. The engine block was completely disassembled, modified according to Elizabeth's designs, and carefully rebuilt. Regular customers continued, bringing work, often staying to watch the race car's progress. Walter Brown even postponed his fishing trip to help with welding reinforcements to the roll cage. "You know," George commented as they worked late one night, "in some ways, Howard's done us a favor. The shop hasn't been this busy in years." "People love an underdog story," Frank agreed, adjusting a timing belt, especially against someone like Howard. Molly wiped grease from her hands. "Speaking of Howard, you never did tell us why your racing friends have issues with him." Frank's hands stilled momentarily. "It's a long story." "We've got time," George encouraged, sensing Frank's hesitation. Frank sighed. "I raced with Howard's older brother, James, back in the day. We were teammates on the regional circuit." He resumed, working as he spoke. "James was the talented one in the family, natural driver, good instincts. Howard was always in his shadow, trying to buy his way to success." "I didn't know Howard had a brother," Molly said. "Not many do," He doesn't talk about James anymore. Frank's voice grew quieter. There was an accident during a qualifying race 15 years ago. James's car went into the wall at 140 mph. George looked up sharply. I remember that crash. It was all over the news. What they didn't report was that James's car had been modified with experimental parts. Howard's idea, trying to give his brother an edge. Frank's jaw tightened. The investigation found the modifications contributed to the crash. Howard managed to keep his name out of the official report, but those of us in racing knew. Was James okay? Molly asked. He survived, but his spine was damaged. Last I heard, he lives in a specialized care facility in Arizona. Frank looked at Molly. That's why I initially refused to help. Racing has consequences when people cut corners. The sobering conversation was interrupted by a knock at the garage's side door. Sheriff Anderson stood there looking uncomfortable. Evening, folks. Hate to bother you, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Kevin Wallace from the bank was in my office today making noise about violations. What violations? George demanded. Claims you're operating a commercial racing enterprise in a residential zoned property without proper permits. The sheriff shrugged. It's nonsense, of course. You've had a repair shop here for decades, but Howard's got Kevin in his pocket, and they're looking for angles. Can they shut us down? Molly asked. Not immediately. There'd have to be hearings, inspections. The sheriff lowered his voice. Just watch yourselves and maybe keep the noise down after 8 p.m. Don't give them any ammunition. After he left, George slammed a wrench onto the workbench. Now, they're using the bank against us, as if the foreclosure threat wasn't enough. We need to work faster, Frank decided. Get the car running within the week, then move testing somewhere less visible. The next day brought another complication. Laura Fisher from the newspaper showed up, camera in hand. I'm writing a feature on the Grand Prix, she announced. The hometown underdog against the reigning champion. People are talking about it all. Over the county, Molly blocked her view of the car. We're not ready for publicity, Laura. The race is 3 weeks away. Readers want the story now. Laura tried to peek around her. Just one photo. No photos, Frank said firmly, emerging from behind the car. No story details. Laura recognized him immediately. You're Frank Williams, the 3-time regional champion who disappeared after the Lakeside 400 crash. This is even better than I expected. Miss Fisher. Frank's voice was ice. You'll get your story after the race, not before. But the Petons would love advance. Details of our build, Molly explained more diplomatically. We can't risk it, Laura considered this, then nodded. Fine, but I want an exclusive. After the race. Win or lose. Deal, Molly agreed, walking her out. When she returned, Frank was loading tools into a pickup truck. Time for a change of scenery. We'll finish the engine here, but testing needs to happen away from prying eyes. Where did you have in mind? George asked. My property has an old barn out back. Enough room to work and no one drives by there. Frank handed Molly a folder. And these came in this morning. Your provisional racing credentials. Study the rule book tonight. That evening, as Molly pored over racing regulations at their kitchen table, George took a rare moment to relax in his armchair, nursing a cup of coffee. Dad, Molly looked up from her reading. Do you think Mom would approve of all this? George smiled. Your mother once rebuilt an engine in our kitchen because the garage was too cold in winter. Oil stains are still on the linoleum. He nodded toward the notebooks. She'd be thrilled to see her designs coming to life. And even more thrilled to see you behind the wheel. I'm scared, Molly admitted. Not of racing, but of letting everyone down. The whole town seems invested now. That's the thing about community, George said. When they believe in you, it's not pressure, it's support. They'll be proud regardless. A knock at the door interrupted them. George opened it to find Dorothy Clark, their elderly neighbor, holding a covered dish. "Figured you two weren't eating properly with all this racing business," she announced, bustling past him. "Brought you my chicken casserole." "That's very kind, Mrs. Clark," Molly said. "Oh, it's nothing. The whole bridge club's involved now." Dorothy set down the dish. "Margaret's knitting good luck socks and Ruth's husband is organizing a viewing area at the track for those who can't afford grandstand tickets." George looks stunned. The whole bridge club, 6 decades in this town. I've watched the Petons push people around foreclosing on the Hendersons when old Jim was in the hospital buying the land from under the community garden. Dorothy's eyes flashed with surprising fire. "It's time." Someone stood up to them. After she left, Molly looked at her father. "No pressure, right?" The next phase of work shifted to Frank's property. The secluded barn became their testing facility, while Pearson's auto repair maintained normal business, hours to avoid suspicion. Every evening they would transport the day's completed components to the barn, slowly assembling the race car in secret. The engine installation was a critical moment. Based on Elizabeth's designs, they had created a unique fuel delivery system that improved torque across all RPM ranges. When they fired it up for the first time, the distinctive rumble made Frank smile. "That sound alone will have Tyler looking over his shoulder," he said, making final adjustments. "Nothing on the track will sound like this." After 2 days of tuning, the car was deemed ready for its first test drive. Frank had created a makeshift track through his wooded property, nothing like the Speedway's asphalt, but enough to test handling and power delivery. "Remember what we practiced?" Frank told Molly, as she suited up in borrowed racing gear. "Feel the car's balance. Don't force it." Molly nodded, adrenaline already coursing through her veins. Quarter speed first run increasing gradually. The first test went smoothly, with Molly carefully navigating the crude track, getting a feel for the car's handling. Each subsequent run, she pushed a little harder, finding the car's limits. On her 5th lap, coming around a tight bend, the gee rear end slid out unexpectedly. For a terrifying moment, the car spun toward a tree-line. Then Molly instinctively corrected, regained control, and brought the car safely back to their makeshift pit area. She climbed out, legs shaking. The back end got loose in the turn. Instead of concern, Frank looked pleased. "You countersteered perfectly, natural instinct." He examined the rear suspension. "We'll adjust the sway bar, but that was good driving." George hugged her. "You scared me half to death." "She's got to learn the car's limits," Frank reminded him. "Better here than at the track." Days blended into nights as they refined the car. Molly's training intensified, with Frank teaching her racing lines, braking techniques, and fuel conservation strategies. The physical conditioning continued, too. Hours of exercises designed to build the specific strength and endurance needed for racing. 2 weeks before the race, they hit a setback. While testing a high-speed run, a connecting rod in the engine broke, causing internal damage. "This is my fault," George said as they surveyed the damage block. "I rushed the machining on those rods." "We can fix it," Molly insisted, though doubt clouded her voice. "We just need replacement parts." Frank shook his head. "Those were custom parts. It would take a week to machine new ones, and we'd need specialized equipment." The mood in the barn darkened. All their work, all the community support, stalled by a single broken component. "There is one option," Frank said reluctantly. "Chester Hoffman might have what we need." "The former racing commissioner?" George asked. "I thought he retired to Florida." "He's back. Lives on the north side of town now." Frank looked uncomfortable. "He collects racing memorabilia, including rare parts. But he and I have history." "What kind of history?" Molly asked. "He was head of the commission that investigated James Peton's crash. I felt he went too easy on Howard, protected the Peton name. We had words." Frank grimaced. Very public, very heated words. George looked at the damaged engine. "We don't have much choice." "Want us to go without you?" "No." Frank squared his shoulders. "Some things are worth swallowing your pride for." Chester Hoffman lived in a modest ranch house with an immaculate garden. The garage, however, was a different story, transformed into a shrine to racing with memorabilia covering every wall and shelves of components organized with museum-like precision. "Frank Williams," Chester said when he opened the door. Surprise evident. "Didn't expect to see you again in this lifetime?" Frank nodded stiffly. "Chester, I need a favor." Inside the garage, Chester listened as they explained their situation, occasionally glancing at old race photos where a younger version of himself stood in victory lane. "So, you're going up against Howard Peton's boy?" Chester mused with a salvage yard car and a rookie driver. He looked at Molly appraisingly. "You got guts. I'll give you that. Do you have connecting rods that would work with our engine?" George asked, bringing the conversation back to their immediate need. Chester walked to a row of storage cabinets. "Might have something. FRX series titanium alloy, if I recall correctly." He unlocked a drawer and withdrew a small box. These were prototypes, never went into production. Frank examined them critically. "These would work stronger than what we had." "What do you want for them?" "Want?" Chester closed the drawer. "Nothing." "Nothing." Frank looked suspicious. "Let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see. The Peton's taken down a peg." Chester handed the box to Molly. "Howard's been pressuring the town council to rezone my neighborhood for commercial development. My house would be demolished for a parking lot." As they prepared to leave, Chester stopped. "Frank, for what it's worth, you were right about the investigation. I caved to pressure, worried about the sport's reputation. Not my finest moment." Frank nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between the men. Back at the barn, they worked through the night installing the new components. By morning, the engine was reassembled, ready for testing. "We've lost days we couldn't afford to lose," Frank said as they prepared for the crucial test. "The race is less than 2 weeks away." The engine roared to life, sounding even stronger than before. Diagnostics showed improved performance across all parameters. As Molly took it for a test run, the car responded beautifully, taking corners with newfound stability. "I think we might actually have a chance," George said as they watched her navigate the track with increasing confidence. "She's a natural," Frank agreed. "But the Speedway is a different animal, faster, more technical. We need to get her some practice on real asphalt." The opportunity came unexpectedly. Harold Newman called George the next day. "The committee is doing pre-race inspections next Tuesday," he explained. "But I could arrange for you to have the track for an hour tomorrow at dawn. Unofficial, of course." "Just between us." Frank was suspicious. "Why would you help us?" Let's just say not everyone on the committee appreciates Howard's influence. Harold replied. My involvement stays between us. Understood? At 5 a.m. the next morning, they arrived at Valledale Speedway with the car covered by a tarp. Harold met them at a side entrance, looking nervously over his shoulder. You've got until 6:30. Track maintenance arrives at 7 cows. He handed them access cards. I was never here. The sun was just peeking over the horizon as Molly drove onto the track for the first time. The difference between their makeshift dirt course and the professional asphalt was immediately apparent. Stay in the lower lanes until you get a feel for it, Frank instructed through the radio. Build speed gradually. Molly's first lap was cautious, the second more confident. By the fifth lap, she was pushing harder, finding the racing line Frank had drilled into her. The car performed beautifully, the engine's distinctive rumble echoing through the empty grandstands. How's the handling in turn 3? Frank asked. Loose on entry but stable through the apex, Molly replied, her voice tight with concentration. Frank made notes. Try carrying more speed into 1 and 2 next lap. They worked methodically through different racing lines and techniques. George timed each lap, noting steady improvement. In the final minutes, Frank gave her the green light to push for a qualifying pace lap. Molly took a deep breath, then launched the car down the straightaway, braking later into turn 1 than she had before. The car responded perfectly, hugging the inside line through the corner, then powering out onto the backstretch. She carried tremendous speed into the tricky turns 3 and 4. The rear end stepping out slightly before she expertly corrected. As she crossed the finish line, George clicked the stopwatch. His eyes widened. That would put her 4th on the grid based on last year's qualifying times, he said incredulously. Frank looked pleased but cautious. One hot lap is different from race conditions, but it's promising. They were packing up when a familiar sports car pulled through the entrance. Tyler Peton stepped out, followed by his father. Well, well, Howard called. Secret practice sessions now. I wonder if the committee knows about this unauthorized use of the track. Frank stepped forward. We have permission, Howard, not that it's any of your business. Tyler walked around their car, studying it with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. This is what you're bringing to the race. Looks like something from a demolition derby. Appearances can be deceiving, Molly replied calmly. Howard's eyes narrowed as he noticed the distinctive engine configuration. Interesting approach. Almost reminds me of those experimental designs Elizabeth Watson was playing with years ago. He looked at George. Your late wife had talent. I'll give her that. Shame to see her legacy reduced to this. George's fists clenched, but Frank placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. If you're done with the intimidation attempt, we were just leaving, Frank said evenly. By all means. Howard smiled coldly. Tyler could use the track time. He needs to practice his victory lap. As they drove away, Molly couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter was no coincidence. How did they know we'd be here? She wondered aloud. Good question, Frank agreed grimly. Harold's the only one who knew besides us. You think he told them? George asked, not deliberately. But Valledale's a small town. Howard has eyes and ears everywhere. At the barn that evening, they assessed their situation. The car was performing well, but they still needed to complete the bodywork and safety systems before final inspection in 5 days. The Petons seeing our design is no problem, Frank admitted. They'll be ready for us now. Can they copy Mom's fuel system design this quickly? Molly asked. Not effectively. It's too complex to reverse engineer on site alone, George considered. But they might modify their strategy knowing what they're up against. Then we adjust, too, Frank decided. We've got one advantage. They don't. They've never seen Molly drive. They're expecting a novice. Let's use that. The final days before inspection were a blur of activity. Sleep became a luxury as they worked around the clock. The community continued rallying around them. Rosa from the diner delivering meals, Walter and his friends helping with the body panels, even Sheriff Anderson happening to drive by Frank's property regularly, ensuring no unwelcome visitors. The car transformed from a mechanical experiment to a proper racer, painted in deep blue with subtle silver accents. Elizabeth's favorite colors. It looked professional despite its humble origins. Across the hood, they added a silver lightning bolt, a nod to the lightning striking twice metaphor. The morning of inspection arrived with tension hanging in the air. The technical committee, led by Harold Newman, methodically checked every aspect of the vehicle against regulation standards. Roll cage exceeds minimum specifications, Harold noted, making check marks on his clipboard. Fire suppression system operational. Fuel cell properly mounted and protected. Howard Peton stood in the background, watching with barely concealed annoyance as each system passed inspection. When they reached the engine, he stepped forward. "I'd like to verify the displacement falls within class limits," he said, pointing. "Do their custom intake system." Harold sighed but nodded. That's a reasonable request. The measurement confirmed they were within regulation parameters, though just barely. Howard didn't look satisfied, but he had no grounds for further objections. The vehicle passes inspection. Harold announced Pearson Racing is officially qualified to compete, pending driver certification tomorrow morning. One hurdle cleared, one remaining. Molly would need to demonstrate her driving proficiency to earn her license, a formality for most experienced racers, but a significant challenge for a rookie. As they left the inspection area, Tyler approached his usual entourage of racing, friends notably absent. "Hey," he called, his tone lacking its usual arrogance. "Can I talk to you for a second, alone?" Molly looked at her father, who nodded cautiously. She followed Tyler to a quiet corner of the paddock. "Look, I know we're supposed to be enemies or whatever," Tyler began, looking uncomfortable. "But I need to warn you about something. My father, he's taking this rivalry with your family way too seriously." "What do you mean?" "I heard him on the phone last night. Something about making sure the problem resolves itself." Tyler ran a hand through his hair. "I'm a racer. I want to win on the track, fair and square. What he's planning, it crosses a line." Molly studied him, searching for any sign of deception. "Why are you telling me this?" "'Cause my Uncle James's crash wasn't an accident." Tyler's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "I was 12 when it happened. I've overheard things over the years, pieced it together. Dad's responsible for what happened to Uncle James, and now he trailed off," looking over his shoulder. "Just be careful, okay? Check your car thoroughly before the race." Before Molly could respond, Howard called for Tyler from across the paddock. Tyler quickly walked away, leaving Molly standing alone with a growing sense of dread. Molly told Frank and her father about Tyler's warning as they returned to the barn to prepare for her driver's certification the next day. "Could be a trick," Frank said, immediately inspecting their car for tampering. "Get us looking in the wrong direction." He seemed genuine, Molly insisted. Scared even. George frowned. If Howard's willing to sabotage a car, then he's crossed a line from competitor to criminal. Frank finished grimly. Wouldn't be the first time. What do we do? Molly asked. We take precautions, Frank decided. From now until race day, the car is never left unattended. We'll sleep in shifts if necessary. George nodded in agreement. And we go through every component again twice. They worked through the night, meticulously checking each part of the vehicle. By dawn, they were satisfied nothing had been tampered with. With yet, though exhaustion had taken its toll, Molly's driver certification test was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. The test consisted of demonstrating proper racing techniques, safety protocols, and completing 10 consecutive laps within a qualifying time threshold. As they prepared at the track, Molly noticed the small crowd gathering in the stands, unusual for what was typically a procedural formality. Word had spread about the mechanic's daughter challenging the Peton dynasty. Don't let it distract you, Frank advised, noting her nervousness. Focus on the track, not the audience, Harold Newman approached with his clipboard. Ready, Miss Pearson. The certification committee is in place. Molly nodded, mouth suddenly dry. You'll need to demonstrate proper grid alignment, race start procedure, passing techniques, and consistent lap times, Harold explained. Any questions? No, sir. Then let's proceed. Frank helped Molly with her helmet and safety harness one final time. Remember what we practiced. Smooth inputs, progressive throttle. Let the car work for you, not against you. As Molly guided the car onto the track, she noticed Howard Peton joining the certification committee in the observation booth. His presence added unwelcome pressure to an already stressful situation. The first part of the test, demonstrating proper race procedures, went flawlessly. Molly executed textbook starts, showed appropriate flag recognition, and demonstrated safe pit entry and exit techniques. Then came the timed laps. Harold's voice crackled over the radio. Miss Pearson, you'll need to complete 10 consecutive laps with consistent times within the qualification standard. Molly took a deep breath and launched the car down the front stretch. The first few laps went well, her times consistent and comfortably within the required threshold. But entering lap 6, something felt wrong. The car's handling became unpredictable, the rear end stepping out unexpectedly in turn 2. Something's not right, she radioed to Frank. Cars loose in the corners? Can you identify the issue? Frank asked, his calm voice steadying her. Molly processed the feedback from the car. Feels like a tire pressure problem. Right rear is squirming. Can you compensate? I'll try. Molly adjusted her driving style, taking a different line through the corners to minimize the instability. Her lap time suffered slightly, but remained within acceptable parameters. With gritted teeth, she completed the final laps, fighting the car the entire way. As she pulled into pit lane, Frank and George immediately checked the right rear tire. Frank's expression darkened as he found a small puncture, air slowly leaking out. This wasn't here before the test, he said quietly. Harold approached with his evaluation form. Congratulations, Miss Pearson. You've passed the certification. Thank you, Molly said, distracted by Frank's discovery. I must say, Harold continued, most experienced drivers would have pitted with handling issues like that. Managing to complete the test, despite the problem, was impressive. After Harold left, George inspected the damaged tire more closely. This is a deliberate puncture small enough to cause a slow leak, not an immediate blowout. Howard, Frank surmised. But we can't prove it. What now? Molly asked. Now we're even more careful." Frank looked toward the observation booth, where Howard was leaving with a satisfied expression. "And maybe we set a little trap of our own." That evening at the garage, they implemented new security measures. George installed motion sensors borrowed from Walter Brown's hunting equipment. Frank brought an old truck camper and parked it behind the building, creating a makeshift surveillance post. 3 days until the race, Frank reminded them. Howard's getting desperate. He's shown he'll break rules to win. While George took the first watch, Molly and Frank reviewed race strategy at the kitchen table of the Pearson home. "Tyler will likely take the pole position," Frank explained, sketching the track layout. "He's been fastest in practice and knows this track better than anyone, so I'll start behind him, probably third or fourth, based on your times. That's actually better for a rookie. Less pressure at the start." Frank circled turn 1. The first corner is where most incidents happen. Everyone's bunched together, running cold tires. "Keep your nose clean. Follow the leaders and be patient." "Patient isn't exactly my strong suit," Molly admitted. "It is now," Frank insisted. "This is a 25-lap race. Plenty of time to make moves. The car has good efficiency. You might be able to stretch fuel further than the others." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Anderson stood on the porch, his expression grim. "Evening," he said. "Thought you should know there's been some talk at Peton Motors. Howard's offering a $5,000 bonus to any driver who keeps the Junkyard special from finishing." "That's race tampering," Frank protested. "It's against every regulation." "Of course it is, but he's smart enough not to put it in writing." The sheriff sighed. "Just a friendly word around the paddock. Impossible to prove. I'd stay clear of traffic during the race if I were you, Molly." After the sheriff left, Molly looked at Frank. "They're trying to intimidate us." "Because they're worried," Frank replied. "You're a threat they didn't anticipate." The next morning brought a surprise visitor to the garage. Laura Fisher arrived with her notebook, but instead of asking questions, she placed a small recorder on the workbench. "You need to hear this," she said, pressing play. Howard Peton's voice emerged from the device. "I don't care what it costs. That girl doesn't finish the race, understand? Whether it's mechanical failure or driver error, make it happen." "Where did you get this?" Frank demanded. Howard was discussing strategy at Jenkins' garage. "I was there interviewing another driver and left my recorder running when I stepped out." Laura looked at them earnestly. "I can't publish this without verification, but I thought you should know." "Thank you," Molly said sincerely. After Laura left, they debated going to the racing committee with the recording. "It's not definitive proof," George pointed out. Howard could claim it was edited or taken out of context, and Laura could lose her job for recording without consent, Molly added. Frank nodded. "We handle this ourselves. But now, we know for certain what we're dealing with." They spent the day completing final preparations on the car. Each component was checked triple times. Redundant systems were installed where possible, and security was tightened further. That night, their vigilance paid off. Around 2:00 a.m., Frank, taking his turn on watch, spotted movement near the garage. A figure in dark clothing was attempting to pick the lock on the side door. Frank radioed George, who was sleeping in the camper. "We've got company," he whispered. "South entrance." "I'll call the sheriff," George replied. "No time, he's getting in." Frank moved silently through the shadows as the intruder finally worked the lock open and slipped inside. Following carefully, Frank recognized the silhouette. One of Tyler's racing teammates, Jason Miller. Jason headed straight for their car, pulling something from his pocket. Frank flipped on the lights. "Looking for something?" he asked calmly. Jason spun around, startled. "I was just breaking and entering. Attempted sabotage." Frank pointed to the small security camera they'd installed in the corner. All on video, Jason's face pad. "Howard will deny everything. It'll be my word against yours." "Probably," Frank agreed, "but you're still trespassing. Sheriff Anderson would be very interested in finding whatever's in your pocket." Jason hesitated, then placed a small electronic device on the workbench. "It's a remote kill switch. Would have cut your ignition at the push of a button during the race." "Get out," Frank said coldly, "and tell Howard his games aren't working." After Jason fled, George emerged from his hiding place. "Should we have called the sheriff anyway? That was proof. Proof that Jason was here, not that Howard sent him." Frank examined the device. "Besides, now we know their tactics. That gives us an advantage." The final day before the race arrived with a buzz of activity throughout Valley. Banners for the Grand Prix hung from storefronts, and the local radio station ran constant updates on the competitors. The annual event had never generated such excitement. At the drivers' meeting, Molly felt the stares of the other racers, mostly men, mostly veterans of the regional circuit. Tyler Peton kept his distance, though he nodded slightly when their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of his warning. Harold Newman reviewed the race procedures, safety protocols, and rules of conduct. "Remember, gentlemen and lady," he added with a nod to Molly, "this is a professional event. Aggressive racing is expected, but deliberate contact will result in penalties." Howard Peton stood at the back of the room, his expression unreadable. As the meeting concluded, he approached Molly. "I admire your determination, Miss Pearson," he said with manufactured civility. "Not many would have the courage to enter their first race against such experienced competition." "Or against such underhanded tactics," Molly replied evenly. Howard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know what you're implying. I'm simply here to ensure my son retains his championship. The racing world has a natural order, Ms. Pearson. Those with talent and resources rise to the top, and those without resort to sabotage and intimidation." Howard's facade cracked momentarily. "Be careful, Ms. Pearson. Accidents happen in racing, even to those with the best intentions." Frank appeared at Molly's side. "Everything okay here?" "Just wishing Ms. Pearson luck," Howard said smoothly before walking. "Away," he's worried, Frank observed. "You can see it in his eyes." That afternoon, qualifying sessions determined the starting grid. Each driver had 3 laps to set their fastest time. Tyler Peton took the pole position as expected, with an experienced driver from Butler County qualifying second. Molly waited nervously as her turn approached. The grandstands were filling with spectators, many holding handmade signs supporting Pearson Racing and Valleydale's own. "Focus on your line, not your time," Frank advised as she strapped in. "Let the speed come naturally." When her moment came, Molly guided the car onto the track with steady hands. Her first lap was conservative, getting a feel for conditions. On her second lap, she pushed harder, carrying more speed through the corners than she had in practice. For her final lap, Molly found a rhythm that made the car feel like an extension of herself. She braked later, accelerated earlier, and maintained perfect lines through each turn. As she crossed the finish line, the crowd erupted in cheers. George's face broke into a wide grin as he checked the timing board. "Third. You qualified third." Frank nodded approvingly. "Better than we hoped, and you've got the inside line for turn 1. As they celebrated this small victory, they noticed Howard Peton in an animated discussion with race officials, gesturing toward their car. Harold Newman broke away from the group and approached them. "There's been a protest filed against your qualifying result," he explained apologetically. "Howard is claiming your engine exceeds displacement limits." "That's ridiculous," George protested. "You measured it yourself during inspection. Protocol requires we perform another measurement when a formal protest is filed." Harold looked uncomfortable. "We'll need to do it immediately." The inspection took place under Howard's watchful eye. The engine was measured again. Calculations were double-checked, and finally Harold made his announcement. "The engine is within legal parameters. The qualifying result stands." Howard stormed off, but not before giving Frank a look that promised. This wasn't over. That evening, a surprising visitor arrived at Pearsons Auto Repair. Victoria Peton, Howard's wife, stood awkwardly at the entrance. "Mrs. Peton," George greeted her cautiously. "What can we do for you?" "I needed to speak with you." She glanced around nervously. "Howard doesn't know I'm here?" Molly offered her a chair, which she accepted gratefully. "I've watched what my husband has been doing to your family," Victoria began. "The sabotage attempts, the threats, it's gone too far." She opened her purse and removed a small notebook. This belonged to James, Howard's brother. He kept records of everything, including the modifications Howard insisted on that caused his crash. Frank took the notebook with reverence. James documented it all. Victoria nodded. "Howard doesn't know I have this. James sent it to me before." She paused. "Before Howard had him moved to a facility where no one could speak to him directly." "Why are you showing us this now?" George asked. "Because history is repeating itself." Howard called someone this morning, ordering special modifications to Tyler's. "A cuff for tomorrow, ones that push well beyond safety limits." Genuine fear showed in her eyes. "My son doesn't know Howard convinced the mechanics it's just an experimental boost system, but it's dangerous, especially if Tyler pushes too hard." "You need to tell Tyler," Molly urged. "I've tried. He won't believe anything negative about his father." Victoria stood to leave. "I'm not asking you to withdraw. Just if you see Tyler struggling with control tomorrow, try to warn him somehow. I can't lose my son the way Howard lost his brother." After she left, they pored over James Peton's notebook, finding detailed descriptions of Howard's dangerous modifications and his pressure to win at any cost. "This explains so much," Frank murmured. James knew the risks, but felt trapped like Tyler does now, Molly added quietly. Frank looked up sharply. "We need to warn the officials about Tyler's car." "With what proof?" George asked. "Victorious. Word against Howard's. They'd never pull Tyler from the race without physical evidence." "Then we race," Molly decided. "But I keep an eye on Tyler. If his car looks unstable, I'll find a way to signal him." They spent the final hours before race day going over every detail of their strategy. The car was as ready as it would ever be. Now, everything depended on Molly's skill and composure under pressure. As midnight approached, George pulled an old photo from his wallet. Elizabeth on their wedding day, radiant in her simple dress. "She'd be so proud of you," he told Molly. "Not just for racing, but for standing up for what's right." Molly hugged her father tightly. "We're doing this for her, too. For her legacy." Frank watched the father-daughter moment with a bittersweet smile. Get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow's going to be the race of a lifetime. Race day dawned clear and crisp. By 8 a.m., cars lined the roads leading to Valley Speedway as spectators arrived early to claim the best viewing spots. What had begun as a local racing event had transformed into something much bigger. A David versus Goliath showdown that captured the imagination of the entire county. The Pearson team arrived to find their designated pit area decorated with handmade signs and banners from townspeople. Dorothy Clark and her bridge club had set up a cheering section in the stands directly above, complete with matching blue T-shirts bearing the lightning bolt design from Molly's car. Looks like half the town is here, George observed, touched by the display of support. Frank remained focused on preparation. Remember, this isn't just about winning anymore. Keep an eye on Tyler's car. If you notice unusual vibration or smoke, try to get his attention. Molly nodded. The weight of dual responsibilities, racing to win, and potentially saving Tyler from his father's recklessness, settling on her shoulders. In the driver's meeting, Harold reviewed last-minute details and emphasized safety protocols. Tyler sat alone, separated from his usual entourage. When Howard entered, he spoke briefly with his son, but the interaction seemed tense rather than supportive. "A driver's to your cars in 20 minutes, Harold announced. "Good luck to all of you." As they disperse, Tyler approached Molly. "Whatever happens out there," he said quietly, "race clean. That's all I ask." "I will," she promised. "You should know. Your mother came to see us last night." Tyler's expression hardened. "My mother worries too much. She said your father made special modifications to your car. Dangerous ones." "My car's fine," Tyler insisted, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "Dad knows what he's doing like he did with your Uncle James," Molly challenged. Tyler fell silent, conflict evident on his face. "Just be careful," Molly urged. "If something feels wrong with the car, pull in. No race is worth what happened to James." Before Tyler could respond, Howard appeared, placing a possessive hand on his son's shoulder. "Time to focus, Tyler. Ms. Pearson is trying to get in your head." He smiled coldly at Molly. A predictable tactic from someone with no real chance of winning. Tyler allowed himself to be led away, but not before giving Molly a troubled glance over his shoulder. As the start time approached, the grand stands filled to capacity. A local high school band played the national anthem and the public address. Announcer introduced each driver to cheers from the crowd. When Molly's name was called, the volume doubled, a wave of support washing over her. Frank helped her with final preparations, checking her safety harness and radio connection. "Remember what we practiced. Smooth and steady first 10 laps, then assess your position. Save something for the end," Molly nodded, her mouth dry with anticipation. "I'll make you proud." "You already have," Frank replied, surprising her with the emotional admission. "Now go show them what a real racer looks like." The command to start. Engines unleashed a symphony of mechanical roars. Molly's car, with its distinctive exhaust note, turned heads throughout the paddock as she guided it into the third position on the starting grid. She caught sight of her father in the pit area, giving her a thumbs up. The pace car led them on the formation lap. Molly used these moments to get a feel for track conditions and check her instruments. Everything appeared normal. Tyler's car directly ahead in pole position showed no obvious signs of the dangerous modifications his mother had mentioned. As they came around for the start, the pace car pulled away. The green flag waved and 20 engines unleashed there. Full power simultaneously. Tyler took an immediate lead with the second-place driver slotting in behind him. Molly held her position through the first turn, resisting the temptation to dive inside for a risky pass. "Good start," Frank's voice came over the radio. "Stay patient." For the first 5 laps, the field remained relatively stable. Tyler opened a small gap at the front, while Molly battled to maintain third against pressure from behind. She noticed that 2 drivers, Jason Miller and another of Tyler's teammates, seemed particularly aggressive when approaching her, often making feinting moves as if to initiate contact. "Howard's cronies are playing games," she radioed to Frank. Expected, "Don't engage, run your race." By lap 10, the field had stretched out with Tyler holding a comfortable lead. Molly remained in third, her lap times consistent and competitive. She was gaining slightly on the second-place car through the technical sections of the track, evidence that their unique setup was working as designed. Then on lap 12, Tyler's car began trailing light smoke from the right side. "Are you seeing this?" Molly asked. Frank affirmed. "Looks like oil smoke. His engine's running hot." Molly closed the gap to the second-place driver, positioning herself where Tyler could see her in his mirrors. When she was sure she had his attention, she tapped her helmet and then pointed forward, a universal racing signal for check your car. Tyler's pace faltered momentarily, suggesting he'd noticed the warning. But instead of backing off, his car suddenly accelerated harder, pulling away with surprising speed. "Something's wrong," Frank observed. His car shouldn't be able to pull away like that. The boost system his mother mentioned must be engaged. Over the next few laps, Tyler extended his lead dramatically, but the smoke from his engine grew more pronounced. Meanwhile, Molly executed a clean pass for second place, establishing herself firmly in the runner-up position. "New strategy," Frank radioed. "Tyler's pushing too hard. His setup can't sustain that pace. Be ready to capitalize when he has problems." Sure enough, by lap 18, Tyler's car began to show signs of stress. His line through the corners became erratic and the smoke intensified. During a straight stretch, Molly pulled alongside him, gesturing toward his engine compartment. Tyler shook his head and maintained his position, but his car was visibly struggling now. Howard's voice came over Tyler's radio loud enough for nearby ears to hear. "Ignore her. Keep your position no matter what." As they entered turn 3 on lap 20, disaster struck. Tyler's right front tire shredded without warning, likely from extreme heat stress caused by the modifications. His car veered toward the outside wall, threatening a high-speed impact. In a split-second decision, Molly broke hard and steered left, allowing her car to act as a buffer between Tyler and the wall. The contact was jarring but controlled, pushing both cars into a spin, but dissipating enough energy to prevent a catastrophic crash. They came to rest in the infield grass, both cars damaged but intact. Molly's quick thinking had prevented a potential tragedy, though it had likely cost her any chance at victory. As safety vehicles approached, Tyler climbed from his car and rushed to Molly's window. "You could have passed me." "Why did you do that?" he demanded, confusion and gratitude battling in his expression. "Because some things matter more than winning," Molly answered simply. The race continued under caution while they were evaluated by medical staff. Frank and George rushed to the infield medical center, finding Molly already discussing the incident with officials. "It was a mechanical failure," she explained to Harold Newman. "Tyler's tire blew and I took evasive action. Evasive action that saved my life," Tyler added, entering the room with his racing suit half removed. If she hadn't done what she did, I'd have hit that wall at over a 100 MEFU. Howard Peton burst in, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell happened out there? You had the lead. How could you let a rookie push you off track?" "She didn't push me off, Dad," Tyler countered. My tire exploded. The car was failing for laps before that. The engine was overheating just like Uncle James's car did. Howard's face palled. "That's entirely different." "Is it?" Tyler challenged. "Mom told me everything this morning, showed me Uncle James's notebook. The modifications you ordered for my car, they're almost identical to what caused his crash." The room fell silent. Howard looked from his son to the officials attempting damage control. "This is ridiculous. The car was professionally prepared." "By your specifications," Tyler interrupted. "Those parts weren't regulation. The boost system was experimental and untested." Harold Newman looked between father and son. "These are serious allegations. If there were illegal modifications, there's an easy way to find out," Frank suggested. "Inspect the car. The evidence will be clear enough." Before Howard could object, Sheriff Anderson appeared at the doorway. "That won't be necessary. We found these in Howard's briefcase, in the Peton trailer." He held up technical diagrams clearly showing modifications that violated multiple safety regulations. Howard's face hardened. "You had no right to search my property." "Actually, I did. Laura Fisher came to me with recordings suggesting race tampering and attempted sabotage. That gave me probable cause." The sheriff didn't look pleased about the situation. "Mr. Peton, we need to have a conversation downtown." As Howard was escorted out, the race officials huddled to discuss how to proceed. Meanwhile, George examined Molly's car. "The suspension's bent and there's body damage, but the engine's intact," he reported. "With quick repairs, you could continue." Molly looked surprised. "Continue? But we're laps down now." Actually, Harold approached them. "Given the circumstances, the committee has decided to red flag the race and restart with the field in positions held before the incident. Since you were in second place, that's where you'd restart." "And since Tyler's car is too damaged to continue," Frank added, "that would put you on pole position." Tyler stepped forward. "You deserve it after what you did out there." He extended his hand. "Good luck! Race hard!" The restart came 30 minutes later. With Tyler withdrawn and Howard absent, the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Molly led the field to green with 10 laps remaining. The second-place driver challenged immediately, attempting to pass on the inside of turn 1. Molly held her line, forcing him to back off. Through the backstretch, she utilized the superior low-end torque of her engine to establish a small lead. "Perfect," Frank coached. "Now find your rhythm. Make the car as wide as possible in the corners." For 3 laps, Molly maintained her position under intense pressure. The years of working on engines had given her an intuitive understanding of what the car needed. Where other drivers forced their vehicles, she worked with hers. A partnership rather than a battle for control. With 5 laps to go, Jason Miller moved into second place and mounted an aggressive pursuit. Unlike the previous challenger, he was willing to make contact, bumping Molly's rear bumper in the corners. "He's trying to rattle you," Frank warned. "Stay focused." On the final lap, Miller made his move, diving inside at turn 3 with excessive speed. Molly anticipated the desperate attempt, taking a slightly higher line that forced Miller to correct mid-corner. His car slid wide, losing precious momentum. Molly powered out of the final turn with a 3-car length advantage. As she crossed the finish line, the checkered flag waving above, the crowd erupted in a deafening roar. George and Frank embraced in the pit lane, their faces etched with disbelief and joy. The victory celebration was unlike anything Valleydale had seen in years. Town residents who had never shown interest in racing cheered as Molly completed her cool-down lap. Dorothy Clark's Bridge Club performed an enthusiastic, if somewhat uncoordinated, dance routine. In Victory Lane, Harold presented Molly with the trophy and winner's check for $10,000. Laura Fisher pushed through the crowd with her camera, capturing the moment for the front page of the Valley Herald. "How does it feel to make history as Valleydale's first female Grand Prix champion?" Laura asked. Molly, still processing the whirlwind of events, smiled. "It feels like a team victory. My father, Frank, and everyone who supported us. We did this together." George joined her, tears glistening in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud. She always said you'd change the world someday." As the celebration continued, Tyler Peton approached through the crowd. The spectators fell silent, expecting confrontation. Instead, Tyler offered sincere congratulations. "That was incredible driving," he said, extending his hand again. "For what it's worth, I've convinced the board of directors at Peton Motors to honor the sponsorship prize despite my father's situation." "Thank you," Molly said, surprised. "But what happens to you now?" "I'm taking over operations while my father deals with his legal issues. First order of business is making things right with people he's wronged." Tyler glanced at her car, including offering proper servicing contracts to all local mechanics, not just those who played by his rules. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed, Molly, George, and Frank gathered at Pearson's Auto Repair. The final notice sign had been removed from the window, replaced by a hastily made Grand Prix Champions banner. Frank, who had remained stoic throughout the day, finally allowed himself a genuine smile. "I never thought I'd find joy in racing again after what happened with James. Thank you for giving me that back. Will you keep coaching now?" Molly asked. "One step at a time," Frank replied. "But I'm not disappearing back to my cabin if that's what you're asking." George raised a coffee mug in toast. "To new beginnings, and to Elizabeth, whose brilliance made this possible." As they celebrated quietly, the sounds of honking horns drew them outside. A procession of vehicles was making its way down the street, townspeople driving past to show their support. Leading the parade was Maria's delivery van, decorated with blue streamers. "You've become a symbol," Frank observed as they waved to the passing cars. "More than just a race winner." "A symbol of what?" Molly asked. "Of what happens when someone refuses to accept the limitations others place on them," George answered proudly. "When they build something extraordinary from parts others discarded." Dorothy Clark pulled up in her ancient station wagon, rolling down her window. "The Bridge Club's hosting a proper celebration dinner tomorrow at the community center. The whole town's coming. Even that news crew from the city that showed up at the end of the race as Dorothy drove away." Molly looked at her father. "News crew from the city?" "Apparently Laura's story about the underdog mechanic's daughter went viral," George explained. "They're saying there might be regional sponsorship opportunities, maybe even chances to race in bigger events." "Is that something you'd want?" Frank asked Molly. She gazed at the garage that had been her home, the trophy that represented their journey, and the community that had rallied around them. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "But whatever comes next, We'll face it together. As a family, the gathering crowd outside the garage grew, their cheers and congratulations filling the evening air. For Molly Pearson, the mechanic's daughter, who had been mocked for racing with a junkyard car, it wasn't just the end of a race. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one built on determination, community support, and the courage to defy expectations. And for the people of Valleydale, it was the day they learned that sometimes lightning does strike twice, and when it does, it changes everything. 3 weeks after her unexpected victory at the Valley Grand Prix, Molly found herself in unfamiliar territory, seated before cameras in the community center, fielding questions from reporters who had descended upon the small town. What had begun as a local triumph had blossomed into a regional sensation after Laura Fisher's article was picked up by larger news outlets. "Miss Pearson, is it true you're considering offers to compete in the state circuit next month?" a reporter from Pittsburgh asked. Molly glanced at Frank, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "I'm exploring options," she answered carefully. "But Pearson's auto repair remains my priority." "How has business changed since your victory?" another reporter inquired. George, seated beside his daughter, chuckled. "We've gone from wondering how to pay the electric bill to needing a waiting list for customers. It's a good problem to have." The transformation of their fortunes had been swift and dramatic. The prize money had eliminated the immediate threat of foreclosure, while the publicity had brought customers from 3 counties away. They'd hired 2 part-time mechanics just to keep up with demand. After the press conference, Frank pulled Molly aside as the reporters packed up their equipment. "You didn't mention the Harrisburg offer." "I'm still thinking about it," Molly admitted. "Racing at that level would mean time away from the garage when Dad needs me most." "Your father's doing fine," Frank noted, nodding toward George, who was enthusiastically showing a reporter their framed trophy. "And he wants this for you." "What about you?" Molly countered. "You said you were taking things one step at a time." Frank's expression softened. "My racing days are behind me, but yours, they're just beginning." As they headed back to the garage, Laura Fisher fell into step beside them. The young reporter had become something of a fixture in their lives since the race, chronicling the aftermath of Molly's victory and Howard Peton's downfall. "Thought you'd want to know," Laura said, lowering her voice. "Howard made bail this morning? The prosecutor offered a plea deal, probation, and community service if he admits to the race tampering charges." "No jail time?" Molly asked, surprised. "First-time offender, prominent businessman, expensive lawyers." Laura shrugged. "But his reputation is destroyed. The Speedway Committee has banned him from all future events, and the dealership is hemorrhaging customers." Frank nodded grimly. Sometimes justice takes different forms. At the garage, they found an unexpected visitor waiting. Victoria Peton sat primly on a plastic chair in the reception area, her designer handbag incongruous against the backdrop of motor, oil, and tools. "Mrs. Peton," George greeted her cautiously. "What can we do for you?" "I came to thank you," Victoria said, rising. "Tyler told me what Molly did during the race. She saved my son's life at the cost of her own certain victory. Anyone would have done the same," Molly insisted. Victoria shook her head. "No, they wouldn't have. Most racers would have seized the opportunity to pass." She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. "I wanted to give you this personally." George accepted the envelope and peered inside, His eyes widened. "Mrs. Peton, this is a check for $20,000. Victoria confirmed. "Consider it partial repayment for the years Howard spent trying to drive you out of business." "We can't accept this," Molly protested. "You can and you will," Victoria insisted. "Howard may have made the Peton name synonymous with cutthroat business practices, but Tyler and I are determined to change that. This isn't charity. It's restitution." After Victoria left, they gathered in George's office to discuss this unexpected windfall. With the prize money and this, George calculated, we could pay off the garage completely, even have enough left to upgrade some equipment. Or, Frank suggested carefully, enough to fund a serious racing effort on the state circuit while keeping the garage operation smooth. Molly looked torn. "Dad, is that what you want?" "For me to pursue racing." George's expression grew thoughtful. "When your mother was alive, she always said you'd outgrow this small town someday. Not because you were too good for it, but because your talents deserved a bigger stage." He smiled softly. I think this is what she meant. Later that afternoon, Molly visited her mother's grave for the first time since the race. The small cemetery on the hill overlooking Valley was peaceful with wild flowers dotting the gentle slopes. "I wish you could have seen it, Mom," Molly said quietly, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone. "Your engine design worked exactly like you predicted. You would have loved every minute of it." As she sat on the grass, lost in thought, she heard footsteps approaching. Tyler Peton arrived carrying his own bouquet of flowers, looking surprised to find Molly there. "I didn't mean to intrude," he apologized. "I can come back later." "It's okay," Molly assured him. "Were you visiting someone?" Tyler gestured toward an ornate headstone several rows away. "My grandfather, my mother's father. He taught me to drive when I was 12. Did it behind my father's back because he thought Howard was pushing me too hard." A moment of understanding passed between them. Two people shaped by family legacies, both complex and contradictory. "I heard about your father's plea deal," Molly said finally. Tyler nodded, his expression hardening slightly. "Mom and I urged him to take it. The alternative would have torn the family apart completely." He hesitated. "I've been meaning to ask you something. That day at the track when my tire blew, you could have won if you just avoided me. Why risk everything to help?" "Because I saw your uncle's notebook," Molly replied simply. "What happened to him was wrong. I couldn't watch history repeat itself, even for a victory." Tyler placed his flowers beside his grandfather's headstone, then turned back to her. "I spoke with Uncle James yesterday. First time in years my father allowed it. He's coming home next month for rehabilitation. Said he wants to see the mechanic's daughter who outdrove the Peton boy." Molly smiled. "I'd like to meet him. You will at the state circuit next month." Tyler's expression brightened. "That's actually why I was looking for you. Peton Motors is officially offering to sponsor you for the 3-race summer series. No strings attached, no Peton interference, just financial backing and technical support." "You're serious?" Molly was stunned after everything that happened. "Because of everything that happened," Tyler corrected, "Mom and I are rebuilding the Peton name. Supporting local talent like you is part of that." The offer was tempting but complicated. Racing with Peton backing meant entering a world where her family's longtime adversaries would become allies. "I need to discuss it with my father and Frank," Molly said cautiously. "Of course the offer stands regardless." Tyler extended his hand. Competitors on the track, but not enemies off it. That evening, the impromptu meeting at Pearson's Auto Repair included not just Molly, George, and Frank, but also Dorothy Clark, who had appointed herself Molly's unofficial PR manager, and Eddie Brooks, whose racing connections had proven invaluable. Peton Motor sponsorship, Eddie mused, scratching his chin. Would have seemed impossible a month ago, but with Tyler at the helm instead of Howard. It's a legitimate offer, Frank confirmed. I made some calls. The money's real, and they're not asking for anything unreasonable in return. Just the usual branding and appearances. But can we trust them? George wondered after everything Howard did. Dorothy snorted. Howard isn't Tyler. That boy's got more of his mother in him, thank goodness. And Victoria's a straight shooter, always has been. There's another option. Frank mentioned Chester Hoffman reached out this morning. His racing connections are willing to put together a sponsorship package as well. Smaller financially, but with no Peton involvement. Molly considered both paths. What do you think, Dad? George took a moment before answering. I think your mother would say to judge people by their actions, not their names. Tyler risked a lot standing up to his father. That counts for something. The e-bell above the shop door jingled, interrupting their discussion. Steve Mitchell, the junkyard owner who had given Molly her race car, entered with an unusual companion, a silver-haired man in an expensive wheelchair. Sorry to barge in, Steve. Apologized, but I was giving an old friend a tour of town, and he insisted on meeting you. The wheelchair-bound man extended his hand to Molly. James Peton. You're even younger than they said. Mr. Peton, Molly stammered, surprised. Tyler mentioned you weren't coming until next month. Accelerated my plans when I heard my nephew was offering you sponsorship. James's eyes twinkled with mischief. Wanted to make sure he wasn't making the same mistakes his father did. Frank stepped forward, recognition and old pain in his eyes. James, it's been a long time. Too long, Frank. James reached out to clasp Frank's hand. Heard you finally got back in the racing game. About damn time. As the old racing colleagues reconnected, Steve explained to the others. James and I were roommates in college. When I heard he was coming back to Valley, I offered my guest house. More accessible than the Peton estate with all those stairs. James turned his attention back to Molly. So, about Tyler's offer, he means well, but there's something you should know. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. This arrived yesterday, an offer from Midwest Motorsports for a 5-race deal. Much bigger exposure, better purse. Molly scanned the document, her eyes widening. This is a professional team. They saw the videos of your driving, James confirmed. That save you made with Tyler's car, that's instinct you can't teach. They want to sign you immediately. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a local sponsorship or regional racing. There was a path to professional competition far beyond what anyone had imagined weeks earlier. But the garage, Molly looked at her father. I can't just leave everything. George squared his shoulders. Pearson's Auto Repair has survived for 3 generations. It'll be here when you come back. This is your moment, Molly. Dorothy wiped away a tear. The whole town will understand. You've already done more for Valladale than anyone expected. And I'm not going anywhere, Frank added. I've got some experience helping your father run a garage. James watched the exchange with approval. For what it's worth, I think you've got what it takes to go all the way. The talent, the instincts, and something Howard never understood: integrity. Later, as the impromptu gathering dispersed, Molly and Frank walked to the back of the garage where her race car sat, still bearing the battle scars from her victory. "Scared?" Frank asked, noting her pensive expression. "Terrified?" Molly admitted. "Professional racing is a different world." "What if I'm not ready?" Frank gestured to the car. 6 months ago, this was junkyard scrap. You saw potential where others saw trash. You worked when others doubted. You raced with honor when others cheated. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're ready." The next morning, Molly made her decision. She would accept the Midwest Motorsports offer with one condition: that her first race would be at the Pennsylvania State Invitational, allowing her hometown supporters to witness her professional debut. The news spread quickly through Valley. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a family business had transformed into something no one could have predicted: the launch of a professional racing career. Preparations began immediately. Frank designed an intensive training program focusing on the differences between local and professional racing. George coordinated with Midwest Motorsports on technical specifications and equipment needs. Even Tyler contributed, providing inside information on the professional circuits and written rules and politics. 2 days later, a film crew arrived from a regional sports network to document the Molly Pearson story. As cameras captured footage around town, locals proudly recounted their roles in supporting the underdog race team. "Knew she had something special the first time I saw her work on an engine," Eddie Brooks told the interviewer. "Hands like her. Mothers, intuitive, precise." "Never doubted her for a minute," Dorothy Clark declared, conveniently forgetting her initial skepticism. "This town sticks together when it counts." The whirlwind of attention and preparation left little time for reflection until one quiet evening when Molly found herself alone at the garage, surrounded by the tools and memories that had shaped her life. She ran her fingers along the workbench, where she'd first learned to rebuild a carburetor at age 10. The pegboard wall still held the wrench her grandfather had used to open the shop in 1952. In the corner stood a small trophy case, now dominated by her Grand Prix victory cup. Saying goodbye, Sheriff Anderson's voice startled her from the doorway. "Not goodbye," Molly corrected. "Just acknowledging changes." The sheriff nodded understandingly. "Changes come whether we're ready or not. The trick is recognizing the good ones." He handed her a manila envelope. "Thought you might want this. Security camera footage from race day shows Howard tampering with Tyler's car before the event." "The prosecutor has this?" Molly asked, confused by why he was bringing it to her. "They have a copy. This is yours? Evidence of the moment that changed everything?" The sheriff smiled faintly. "Sometimes we need reminders of where we've been to appreciate where we're going." As Sheriff Anderson left, Frank arrived carrying a stack of racing magazines. "Found these at the library. Professional circuit coverage from the last few seasons. Thought you should study the competition." Molly set down the envelope and took the magazines. "Thanks for everything, Frank. I wouldn't be here without you." "Sure you would," Frank countered. "Maybe by a different path, but you have your mother's determination. Some things are just meant to be." "Will you come with me?" Molly asked suddenly. "To the professional races. I'll need a coach I can trust." Frank hesitated, his old reluctance briefly visible. Then he nodded. "Someone's got to keep you from picking up bad habits from those professional hotshots." The following Sunday, Valleydale's church parking lot overflowed as the town gathered for what had been hastily dubbed Molly Pearson Day. The mayor presented her with a key to the city. The high school band performed an enthusiastic, if somewhat chaotic rendition of "We Are the Champions," and Maria Rodriguez unveiled a new menu item at her diner, the Checkered Flag Special. Through it all, Molly maintained the humility that had endeared her to the community when finally called upon to speak. She kept her remarks simple and heartfelt. Valleydale gave me more than a place to grow up. It gave me the courage to believe in myself when others didn't. Whatever happens next, I'll carry that lesson with me around every turn. As the celebration continued into the evening, Molly slipped away with George and Frank to the garage. Tomorrow would bring contracts to sign, plans to finalize, and the first steps toward a future none of them had imagined months earlier. But tonight was for honoring the journey that had brought them here. A desperate plan born from necessity, a community that rallied behind them, and a race that had changed everything. To new beginnings, George proposed, raising a coffee mug in the office where they had first discussed entering the Grand Prix. And to junkyard cars, Molly added with a smile. May they always surprise those who underestimate them, Frank finished. The Pennsylvania State Invitational was held at Keystone Speedway, a professional grade track 3 times the size of Valleydale's modest circuit. As Molly arrived with Frank and George, the scale of the event immediately underscored the leap she was making from local racer to professional competitor. Intimidating, isn't it? Frank observed as they surveyed the massive grandstands and state-of-the-art facilities. A bit, Molly admitted, watching haulers unload cars that cost more than 10 years' worth of Pearsons auto repair profits. A representative from Midwest Motorsports met them at the credential office, a polished woman named Rebecca Taylor, who efficiently guided them through the labyrinth of professional racing protocols. We've arranged temporary garage space for your team, Rebecca explained, leading them to a section adorned with the Midwest Motorsports logo. Though I should mention several of our engineers were quite interested in seeing the modifications you made to your previous car. That intake design was unique. My mother's design, Molly clarified. Will I be driving one of your standard cars today? Rebecca nodded. For the qualification session, yes, but if you sign with us officially after the weekend, we're open to implementing some of your innovations into a custom build. The professional team's resources were overwhelming: 3 mechanics per car, computer diagnostics that measured hundreds of parameters simultaneously, and custom parts manufactured to precise specifications. It was racing on an entirely different level. Try not to look like tourists, Frank muttered as they followed Rebecca through the facility. Confidence matters here. The morning passed in a blur of introductions, paperwork, and technical briefings. Molly met her potential teammates, seasoned professionals who regarded her with polite skepticism. Their reserved welcome made clear that her Valleydale victory had caught attention, but proving herself at this level would require more than one inspirational underdog story. By early afternoon, it was time for Molly's first practice session in the Midwest car. As she suited up, George pulled her aside. I know that look, he said gently. You're overthinking. These drivers have years of professional experience, Molly worried. Their cars cost more than our house and garage combined, and not one of them has what you have, George reminded her. Your mother's instincts and your own determination. The equipment matters less than the person controlling it. Frank joined them, having just returned from inspecting the track. The surface is smoother than Valley, but the principles remain the same. Trust your training. Start conservative. Learn the car's feedback. Then build speed methodically. As Molly walked toward the waiting Midwest car, gleaming with professional polish and sponsor decals, she saw a familiar figure approaching from the competitor's area. Tyler Peton, now wearing the colors of his family's restructured racing. "And team," thought, "I'd wish you luck," he said, extending his hand. "Though I'll be trying to beat you later." "You're racing today?" Molly asked, surprised. "Last-minute entry with my father indisposed. The team needed a driver." Tyler glanced around at the professional environment. "Different world from Valley, isn't it?" "Completely." Molly agreed. "Is your uncle here in the owner's suite? Said he wouldn't miss seeing the mechanic's daughter taking on the professionals." Tyler's expression grew more serious. "Listen. These drivers won't give you any breaks because of your story. If anything, they'll be harder on you to prove you don't belong." "I know. Thanks for the warning." "It wasn't a warning," Tyler clarified. "It was a vote of confidence. Show them what Valley racers can do." The practice session was humbling. The professional car responded differently than her modified junkyard racer. More refined, but less forgiving. Molly completed her allotted laps with cautious respect for the machine, posting times in the middle of the pack. When she returned to the garage, Frank was reviewing her telemetry data with one of the Midwest engineers. Braking too early in turns 3 and 4, the engineer observed clinically, losing 210 per lap there alone. "She's learning the car," Frank defended, first time in professional equipment. "I can hear you both," Molly interjected, removing her helmet. "And you're both right. I'm being too cautious." The engineer, a young man named Alex, looked surprised at her candor. "Most rookies blame the car or make excuses." "I'm not most rookies," Molly replied. "I'll find the time in qualifying." Between sessions, they were surprised by a steady stream of visitors from Valladale. Dorothy Clark arrived with a bus full of supporters. Eddie Brooks brought several former racers who'd competed with Frank years earlier. Even Sheriff Anderson made an appearance, though he claimed it was just to make sure our local celebrity behaves herself. "The whole town's behind you," George said, watching the growing contingent of Valley residents setting up in the grandstands. "No pressure or anything?" Molly laughed nervously. "Thanks for that. Qualifying would determine her starting position for the race and, more importantly, validate whether she belonged among professional drivers." As she waited for her qualifying attempt, she noticed a distinguished figure being wheeled toward by Steve Mitchell. "James Peton," she greeted him. "I didn't expect to see you down in the pits." "Couldn't miss this," James replied, his eyes bright with enthusiasm despite his physical limitations. "The suits upstairs talk statistics and sponsorships. I wanted to feel the energy down here." "Any advice?" Molly asked. James considered the question. "Remember that qualifying and racing are different skills. Today it's just you against the clock. No need to defend position or plan strategy. Pure speed." He gestured toward the track. "This surface rewards commitment. Trust the grip, especially in turn 2, where most rookies lift unnecessarily." Frank appeared to announce it was nearly time for her qualifying run. James extended his hand. "One last thing. My brother tried to build champions through intimidation and manipulation. Never worked. The best races are forged through encouragement and belief." He glanced at Frank and George. "You've got that part figured out already." When Molly's turn came, she approached the qualifying attempt with newfound clarity. The Midwest car felt more familiar now, its responses more predictable. As she accelerated onto the track for her flying lap, she channeled every lesson Frank had taught her about precision and focus. Through turn 1, she carried more speed than in practice. Approaching turn 2, she recalled James's advice and resisted. The instinct to lift, feeling the car's downforce keeping it planted to the track. Each corner flowed into the next as she found a rhythm that made the sophisticated machine feel like an extension of herself. Crossing the finish line, she had no idea if her time was competitive until she heard Frank's voice over the radio, controlled but unmistakably excited. P4. You qualified 4th out of 24. The Valley contingent erupted in cheers loud enough to be heard over the engine. As Molly returned to pit lane, Rebecca from Midwest Motorsports was already on the phone, undoubtedly reporting the unexpected result to team executives. Not bad for a junkyard racer, Tyler said, approaching with a grin. It qualified 7th, a respectable showing for his first professional event as well. The real test comes tomorrow, Molly reminded herself. Race morning brought perfect weather and crowds larger than anything Molly had experienced. As she prepared in the Midwest garage, Rebecca approached with contract papers. The team owner is impressed, she explained. We're prepared to finalize your 5-race deal immediately with an option for a full season depending on results. Molly glanced at the documents, then at her father and Frank. After the race, she decided, I want to earn this first. The professional pre-race routine was elaborate. Driver introductions, national anthem, sponsor obligations, and safety briefings. Through it all, Molly maintained the focused calm Frank had instilled in her. When she finally settled into the car, the familiar environment of a cockpit, harness, and controls provided a welcome respite from the surrounding spectacle. Remember the strategy? Frank's voice came through her radio during the pace laps. Clean start. Protect your position early. Save your equipment for the final third of the race. The green flag dropped, unleashing 30 professional race cars in a thundering charge toward the first turn. Molly held her line, resisting the temptation to dive inside for an early pass. The leaders bunched through the first sequence of corners, but the professional drivers maintained precise control, avoiding the chaos that often marked local races. By lap 5, the field had settled into a rhythm. Molly remained 4th, learning from the lines taken by the more experienced drivers ahead. The Midwest car was responsive and balanced, allowing her to maintain consistent lap times while studying potential passing opportunities. You're matching the leader's pace, Frank reported. Fuel consumption looks good. Stay patient. Near the halfway point, the first round of pit stops began. This was entirely new territory for Molly. At Valley, races were short enough to run without refueling. The Midwest crew had briefed her extensively on pit lane procedures, but theory and practice were very different things. Box this lap, Frank instructed, using racing terminology for entering the pits. Hit your marks and follow the crew's signals. Molly navigated the tricky pit entry, carefully observing the speed limit. The Midwest crew swarmed the car with choreographed precision. Fuel going in, fresh tires mounted, windshield cleaned, all in a blur of motion. 12 seconds later, she was released back onto the track. Great stop, Frank confirmed. You're P5 now, but the leader hasn't pitted yet. When the pit cycle completed, Molly found herself in 3rd position. The top 2 cars had established a gap, but third through sixth were bunched together in an intensifying battle. Among them was Tyler Peton, who had gained positions through an excellent pit stop strategy. For several laps, Molly defended her position against increasingly aggressive challenges from behind. The professional drivers tested her resolve with feints and pressure, looking for any sign of rookie nervousness. Instead, they discovered the same steady composure that had carried her through the Valley race. 20 laps to go, Frank updated her. Time to push if you're going to move forward. Molly had been studying the second-place car's tendencies, braking slightly early in turn 3, taking a defensive line through the final corner. With newfound confidence in the Midwest machine, she began closing the gap. "Go get him, kid," Frank encouraged as she positioned herself for a pass. With 15 laps remaining, Molly executed a textbook outside pass in turn 4, surprising the veteran driver who hadn't expected such a bold move from a rookie. The Valleydale section of the grandstands erupted as she moved into second place. "Perfect execution," Frank praised. "The leader is 4 seconds ahead, catchable but difficult." What followed was a masterclass in determined driving. Lap after lap, Molly chipped away at the leader's advantage. Her consistent lines and smooth inputs preserved her tires while maintaining maximum speed. With 5 laps to go, the gap had shrunk to just over 2 seconds. "She can't possibly catch him," Alex, the engineer, muttered in the pit box, watching the telemetry. "Not without a mistake from Nielsen." "You don't know my daughter," George replied confidently. Frank remained tactical on the radio. 2 seconds back. 4 laps to go. Nielsen's running defensive lines now. He knows you're coming. The leader, a 3-time champion named Eric Nielsen, was visibly pushing harder now, his car occasionally sliding through corners as he prioritized track position over perfect technique. The gap continued to shrink. 1.8 seconds, then 1.5, then 1.22. With 2 laps remaining, lap traffic complicated the equation. Nielsen navigated past slower cars smoothly, but the delay cost precious tenths of a second. As they began the final lap, Molly had closed to within striking distance, less than a second behind. Last lap. Frank's voice remained remarkably calm. "One shot at this. Make it count." Through the first sequence of corners, Molly stayed close, refusing to let Nielsen establish breathing room. Down the back straight, she pulled slightly to the inside, forcing Nielsen to defend into turn 3. His defensive line compromised his exit speed from the corner, allowing Molly to get an exceptional run toward the final turn. As they approached the last corner, Nielsen moved to block the inside line, the textbook defensive position. In a moment of inspiration born from countless hours working with Frank, Molly feinted toward the inside, then abruptly swung wide, carrying tremendous speed around the outside of the final turn. For a breathless moment, the cars ran side by side, inches apart at over 140 mph. Then Molly's superior exit speed gave her the edge, pulling ahead as they charged toward the finish line. She crossed the line less than 0.2 of a second ahead of Nielsen, securing a victory that sent the Valley supporters into ecstatic celebration. George and Frank embraced in the pit box, the normally stoic Frank showing rare emotion. "Did she just?" Rebecca stammered, staring at the monitors in disbelief. Outside pass on the final corner against a 3-time champion, Alex completed her thought. "Yeah, she just did that." In victory lane, surrounded by cameras and microphones, Molly appeared almost shocked by her own achievement. As she accepted the trophy, she spotted familiar faces everywhere. Her father and Frank beaming with pride, Dorothy and her bridge club executing an enthusiastic victory dance, Tyler offering a respectful nod of acknowledgement. "How does it feel to win your professional debut against established champions?" a reporter asked. Molly took a moment to gather her thoughts. "Honestly, I'm just grateful. 6 months ago, I was worried about losing our family garage. Now I'm here because people believed in me when I barely believed in myself." She looked toward Frank and her father. "This victory belongs to everyone who helped turn a junkyard car into something special." Later in the Midwest Motorsports Hospitality Suite, Rebecca presented the contract again, now with improved terms. Following the unexpected victory, James Peton had joined them along with several racing industry executives eager to meet the sport's newest sensation. "Before I sign," Molly addressed the room. "I need to clarify something. I'll race the full season on one condition. Frank Williams comes with me as my personal coach, and I'll need weekends off when Pearson's Auto Repair has special events." Rebecca glanced at her superiors, who nodded without hesitation. "I think we can accommodate that. Anything else?" "Yes," Molly said firmly. "The engineering team needs to study these." She placed her mother's notebooks on the table. "The innovations that helped us win at Valley can make these cars even better." As the executives leaped through Elizabeth Pearson's designs with growing excitement, Frank pulled Molly aside. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. "Not just of the racing, but of how you've handled everything. The victory, the setbacks, the pressure." "I had good teachers," Molly replied. Across the room, George was engaged in conversation with James Peton, the two men finding common ground in their pride for the next generation's achievements. Tyler had joined them, discussing the race with the animated enthusiasm of someone who'd found joy in competition again, free from his father's toxic influence. The final chapter of Molly's journey from desperate garage mechanic to professional race winner came full circle when she returned to Valley. 2 days later, Mayor Carson had organized another celebration, this one attracting regional news coverage and visitors from neighboring counties as Molly stood on the steps of the community center. She surveyed the town that had shaped her. The modest garage where she'd learned her craft, the junkyard where Steve Mitchell had given her the discarded race car, the diner where Maria had rallied support, and the people who had stood by the Pearsons when the future seemed bleakest. "I never planned to be a racer," she told the gathered crowd. "I just wanted to save our family business. But sometimes life takes us in unexpected directions when we're brave enough to try something that seems impossible." She gestured toward the newly renovated Pearson's Auto Repair, now sporting a fresh coat of paint and an expanded garage bay. "Thanks to all of you, our family legacy continues. And while I'll be racing on bigger tracks, Valley will always be home. The place where a mechanic's daughter learned that it's not about where you start, but how you finish." The applause was deafening, led by Dorothy Clark's enthusiastic bridge club and the high school students who had already formed a Molly Pearson fan club. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Molly, George, and Frank found themselves back at the garage. The final notice that had once threatened their future was now replaced by framed newspaper headlines proclaiming both victories. In the corner sat the original Junkyard race car, now retired but preserved as a reminder of where the journey began. What happens now? Molly wondered aloud, contemplating the professional season ahead. "Now," Frank replied with the wisdom of someone who had seen racing's highest highs and lowest lows. "You remember that winning is wonderful, but it's the people beside you along the way that matter most." George nodded in agreement, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Your mother used to say that life isn't about the trophies you collect, but the problems you solve and the people you help. Speaking of helping people, Molly said, glancing at the workbench where a pile of employment applications waited, we need to hire a full-time mechanic to keep this place running while we're at the tracks. Already interviewing, George assured her. Found some promising candidates, even one young woman from the community college who reminds me a bit of you at that age. Molly smiled at the thought of another generation finding purpose among engines and tools. The garage that had nearly slipped away was now becoming a launching pad for new dreams. As night fell over, Molly took a final walk through the quiet shop. Her fingers traced the familiar tools that had built not just cars, but character. The journey from mockery to victory had taught her something no trophy could represent, that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements come from ordinary people who simply refused to accept the limitations others place upon them. In the soft glow of the garage lights, she paused at her mother's photograph on the wall. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "And this is just the beginning." Up next, 2 more. Incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a